And again, today's presentation is on common mistakes and challenges to country living. So this is something that has always been an interest of mine from a young age. From my childhood, I was into things like gardening. And this is even though I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area in a city, but still I was exposed to things related to country living, including my family when I was young purchased some land in the country in Maryland, and it was just a lot with just full of trees. And we cleared that lot and built a home. And it was a place where we gathered together during summers and just a place for family to get together. And my grandparents, they spent a lot of time there. And as a result, I spent a lot of time there with my grandparents. And I grew up there learning to enjoy that environment and having experience with it. Also in DC, I had exposure to things like gardening and horses and outdoors and camping. So I was blessed, and I can always have been able to look back at that and realize that God was preparing me. And that was something that enabled me to be in a good position now that I am in the country and even during the time of seeking a place in the country. So I'm going to share with you some of the things, some mistakes that I've made and some mistakes that others have made to help you if you're, whether you're in the country now or that's a desire that you have to get to the country. I'm hoping that this presentation will be a benefit to you. So this is the outline for the presentation. I'm going to do a basic introduction. Then we're going to look at mistakes that people make in regards to the country. That first one there, the lack of preparation, not following your path. Sometimes people will follow the path that they've seen others take rather than the path that God has for them. Then there are many hurdles along the way that you're going to encounter, and how you handle those is going to be important to your success. We're going to talk about perspective. The mistake is to have a wrong perspective of country living. Another mistake is to embrace a lot of misconceptions that are out there about living in the country. Then I'm going to have some closing thoughts and time for questions and answers if you do have questions. So here's a scripture from Genesis chapter 2, verses 8, and it says, "And the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed." In that second paragraph, there is a quote from the Ministry of Healing. It says, "It was not God's purpose that people should be crowded into cities, huddled together in terraces and tenements. In the beginning, he placed our first parents amidst the beautiful sights and sounds he desires us to rejoice in today. The more nearly we come into harmony with God's original plan, the more favorable will be our position to secure health of body and mind and soul." And you can see there that God created us and he put us in the garden. He could have placed us in a castle, in a resort, all inclusive, and we could learn about him, where we could have experiences with nature. And that's something that we also find in country living. And God has a purpose because he knows that that's the best environment for us, much better than living crowded together in a city with the hustle and the bustle and noise and pollution, and not be in touch with nature, things that draw us closer to him. So that this is something that we can still desire or work to attain even now in today's age. Here's a view of the property where I am. I'm in West Virginia, and I've lived here for about 6 or 7 years now, but it seems like just 2 or 3 years that I've been here. But I have been here a while, and I've done a lot with the property since I've been here. This photo is from maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and this is out looking out towards the garden area. And you can see there are some high tunnels that were in construction. I was just getting those set up and put in. I was just in the process of putting in an irrigation system. And that's something that you'll find with a lot of country properties. When you get there, they're not going to be in the condition or state that you want them to be in. You're going to constantly be improving them, and that's just part of the process. One of the benefits of being in the country is just that exposure to nature, and you'll see wildlife, and you'll be able to get up close with them, and you'll be in a position where it'll be different than what you may be used to, because you're used to, seeing animals after they see you. In the country, you'll have a better position of spotting them and seeing them and watching and observing them to really get a feel for how they live and how they even interact with each other and with other animals. Then there's always something to explore in the country. This is a photo of a lower level of my property. This is an area where you can just go down there and it's just like almost like you're in a different place when you're down there because it's a different environment from up on the ridge where it's mostly clear and fields. Down here it's just all forested and there's a creek, there are rocks and caves, just an entirely different environment and different things to explore and learn of. Here's another photo of the wildlife that you see and that you're able to get up close and just get a better perspective, a better view of them and how they live. I mentioned not preparing for country living is one of the mistakes that people make. So now I'm going to be focused on what you can do to prepare for living in the country. And the scripture here is from Matthew chapter 13, verse 44. It says, "Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto treasure hid in a field, the which when a man hath found, he hideth, and for joy thereof goeth and selleth all that he hath, and buyeth that field." And I think country living is kind of like that. It is something that you can appreciate, you can treasure, put value on, and you're willing to invest to do what you need to do or what you have to do in order to get that, just like this treasure that the man has found in the scripture. So for me, there's a lot of things that you can do to prepare for living in the country. And too often our focus is on getting there. It's not on preparing to be there and to live there. And you don't want to wait until you get there to start preparing. That's why I see a lot of people do make that mistake. They don't do things that they can do in advance. And the more that you do to prepare ahead of time, the better it's going to be once you get to the country. You're going to be able to focus your energy and your efforts on other things other than the very basic aspects of country living. One thing you want that's important is to just cultivate the mindset that you have, because this is going to mean a lot in terms of you succeeding there. And to just have a desire to be in the country. If you don't have a desire, it's probably not going to work out because it's totally different than what you may be accustomed to. It's totally different than life in the city. And if you don't want that, if you don't see the value and benefit of that, then you're not going to you're not even going to want to be there after a certain amount of time. It's just going to get to the point where it's more of a chore and more just something that you don't enjoy. But you want to have the determination in order to just persist and to last once you get in the country and appreciate what you have. That's something I see with a lot of people that grow up in the country, even people here in my area that they were born and raised here, and they don't appreciate what's here. I'll talk with people and they'll, look at me and they'll be like, well, you moved here from a city, and their whole objective is to leave the country and move to a city, and they just don't understand and they don't realize what they have right here. And I understand, especially for a lot of the youth, the younger people, they see that there's no opportunity or there's less opportunity in terms of things like work and careers and jobs and social aspects. But some of them, they leave and they go away to a bigger city. And then after a while, that's when they appreciate and realize what they had back here and they may come back. But others, they get caught up and they just never have any interest in or even understand and appreciate what they had right here where they grew up. There's a book, it's called Country Living by Ellen White. And that's a good thing. If you're not familiar, you're just starting out with the whole concept of country living, that's a good place to start because it presents things from a Christian perspective. And this is an older book. It was written probably over 100 years ago. So some of the things might seem dated in terms of the terminology and the things that she said, but just the principles and the ideas that she presents are still valid and still applicable to us today. So it is definitely a good read for you if you want to find out more about reasons to, head to the country and the benefits that are waiting for you and just the spiritual aspects of the whole idea of living in the country. Another thing that you can do to prepare for country living is to just wherever you are. Start spending more time out in nature and spend time out there with your family. Because once you move to the country, you're going to be surrounded by nature everywhere. The minute that you walk out of your door, there's going to be nature just everywhere that you turn. And it's good to be comfortable in nature because some people, a lot of people, they're not used to it. And even little things like the quiet, that's something that it takes them a while to adjust to. They're just not used to being able to step out and it's just totally silent, or to be able to just hear birds singing, from a distance, and even sometimes voices, that the sounds that you normally would never even hear, they would be drowned out in the country. They just carry for long distances. And another thing, and this is a big one, it's like facing your fears, because we all have fears of things that are new and that we aren't used to. And it's the same with country living, because there are a lot of things that people are afraid of. Sometimes it's the animals, it's the wildlife, and people can't accept that, or it just causes them to really stress out over the fact that, they're these animals and they're out there running around and you're going to encounter them. Other things that people fear, sometimes people are just afraid of the dark because out here it gets dark, at nighttime you don't have the street lights, you don't have the typical light pollution that you have in the city. And that's something else that some people are just causes them to be fearful. The fear of the unknown, not knowing what to expect when you're moving, away from where you lived or where you grew up, where your family is, and to be out in an area where there's nothing that you're familiar with or used to, being separated from a lot of those things that can cause fear. But these are things that you need to think about and to face before you even go get out to the country. Something else that will help just in preparing for country life is to just start. If you're in the city, start distancing yourself from the city. And you can do this, just in terms of, well, what are you spending your time on? Are you focused on things related to city life? Are you spending money in investing your resources in the times that relate to the city? You can start transitioning long before you move to the country. You can start making that change and changing, what you're focused on and where you're spending your interest. And even if you're looking, whether it's YouTube or reading, the types of things that you're taking in, start doing things that are related to life in the country. And that's something that will help you just to prepare for when you do get there. Another thing that's important is to work on your health and your fitness. Because when you're in the country, you're going to be active. That's just going to be a normal part of your life. There are going to be things that you need to do, work and things outside. So it's important that you be fit in order to do a lot of these things, whether it's gardening, whether it's just maintaining your property. There's just so many things that your health and your strength is going to be important. And that's regardless of your age, just having the fitness that you can walk. You should be able to walk and walk. And, that's something that will help build that fitness. And another aspect of your health is that if there are things that you need to improve, work on them before you get to the country. It's going to be easier to build up while you're there in the city or wherever you are. For one thing, when you get out to the country, the healthcare is just totally different. You may be in an area where there's no hospital even close to you. For to get to the doctor, it might take you an hour to drive to a doctor. So things that you can do before you make that move to improve your health, that's going to help you just a great deal. Even things as far as your dental health, take care of that. If there's work that that you need to have done, do it. Do it now and don't wait until after you make that move. Another thing is what you're going to be investing your money in. You need to start investing in things that are related to the country. And there are things before I moved to the country, there were things that I knew I was going to need. So I started buying these things, even though they were things that I really couldn't use at that time where I was in the city, but still I was buying them knowing that I was going to need them when I did move to the country. And I think for one thing, that's something that even that kind of shows God, well, hey, I'm serious about this. This is I'm putting my heart into this. I'm putting my money into this, preparing for when I get there. And I know that you're going to help me to get there. And I think God, that's something that God does take note of. And there were just, even sometimes it's just little things like I had purchased a water purifier, and it was probably like a $200 or $300 investment, but I did that and I purchased it, and I had that for years before I moved, and I never really used it when I was in the city because there was just some other issues that I didn't use it, and it didn't really need to use it. I had other alternatives for my water, but once I moved to the country, I used that every day, so it wasn't like it was wasted in any way. So take advantage of the time that you have now and start investing in things. Another thing could be, gardening tools. These are the types of things that you might know that you're going to need when you leave the city if you're living in the country. So put money into those things and you'll have them when you do need them. Another thing is just develop the skills that you're going to need when you're after you move into the country. And that DIY, do it yourself. That's just so important because once you move, you may be in an area like where I am. It's hard to find people to do just things like electrical and plumbing and carpentry. So the more of these things that you know that you can do yourself, it's going to benefit you down the road because it's going to either you won't be able to find someone, or you might be able to find someone and it's going to take them, weeks to get around to assisting you, or someone, if there's the nearest city, they may have plumbers and electricians and people that are skilled in those areas, but they're not going to want to drive, an hour to get to you if right where they live, they can go 5 minutes and get all the business that they need. So that just makes it difficult here when you're living in the country. So it is important to learn to do as much as you can. There are going to be things that you aren't going to be able to learn. So there are other ways to kind of, find someone to help you. But even if you do that, when they come out and they're working for you, you should be right there watching what they're doing, asking questions, learning what they're doing, and learning the skills and the techniques, and do whatever else you can do to gain these skills yourself. This is something else that is easier for you to do and to develop a lot of these skills before you move to the country. Because if you're in the city, a lot of times there, whether it's a university, community college, just there are lots of opportunities where you can go and you can get knowledge, whether it's woodworking, carpentry, sewing, knitting. There are groups and people that you can go and learn these things a lot easier right there where you live than once after you move to the country. And also now there's just so much that you can get just off of the internet and YouTube, and starting to take advantage of those options is important, and to learn and develop your skills now and become proficient in them. And the point there about don't wait until you arrive. I said that earlier on, don't put off preparing, but it's just important. You don't want to think, okay, I'm just going to wait. And then when I'm there, that's when I'm going to worry about learning these skills or learning them. Start doing that ahead of time. And money, a lot of people, as far as their preparation for country living, the focus is on the money. They know, okay, that's where their thought is, okay, this is what I need to do to prepare for country living. I need to get money to get to the country. But that money is less important than you might think. Yes, you're gonna need money. And depending on how you're getting to the country, it may be, a significant priority, but still, God has ways, and He's the one that's really in control, and He can make ways for you that you don't expect, you don't anticipate. So don't let that focus just be on, okay, how am I going to get money? And I can't do this or I can't do that unless I have the money to do it. So then a question I have for you is, how has God been preparing you for the country? I mean, I can look back and I can see in my past that God was doing things to prepare me. And I'm sure He's been preparing you also. You may not realize it, but there have been things that He's been building. He's been giving you skills and talents that you're going to be able to use when you get to the country. Here's a photo. This is just one of the things. If you're in the country and you're gardening, you're growing your own food, you're also going to need to know how to preserve that food. And canning, that's one of the skills. Food dehydration, that's another skill. Freezing, just the different techniques, even cooking and preparing food to start with. These are things that you're going to need to know and that are going to benefit you. So take advantage of the time that you have now and pick up these skills, even if you're not currently living in the country. This is a garden. This was in my backyard in Pennsylvania. I was in a suburban neighborhood, and my lot was about a third of an acre, but still, I was growing vegetable gardens there. I had bees there. I was composting. So you can still, even if you're in a city or if you're in the suburbs, you're not in the country, you can still be learning how to garden and produce your own food. And this is a fig tree. This is something you can grow in a container. Even if you don't have a backyard, there are things that you can be growing. You could even be doing microgreens and sprouting. Even if you have no garden, no balcony, patio, nothing, there's still things that you can do. Another thing is you could be growing a garden in someone else's yard. I used to do that when I lived in Maryland. And that was something that, is an option that you have. It's just another way that you can start developing skills wherever you are. Yeah, I mentioned facing your fears, and this is a big one for a lot of people. And I was on a Zoom once before, and snakes that came up, and there was one woman on there. She mentioned that, yeah, that was her deal breaker with snakes. If she saw a snake, or even her fear that was kind of holding her back and preventing her from moving to the country, was just that this fear that she had of snakes. And there was a family that lived on my property a couple of years ago, and the mom, this was one of her fears was snakes. She was terrified of snakes, and she had brought that up even in advance when she was here. She mentioned about how she was just terrified of snakes, and her fear was carrying over to her daughter, who might have been like 3 or 4 at the time. She didn't know about snakes, but she just was getting the fear from her mom was, being picked up in her daughter. Was getting that same fear. And one day, she called me, and her husband was out off working, and she called me to tell me that there was a snake in their front yard. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I realized that wasn't going to be a sufficient response for her. So I had to go over there, and I walked over there, and I walked up to the house, and I saw the snake in the front yard, and I saw she was in the window, peeking out the window, watching this snake and watching me. And so I caught the snake, and then she opened the door and she came out on the deck, and I was holding the snake, and she came down to where I was, and we were talking, and she was watching. She saw the snake, and I asked her if she wanted to touch the snake, and then she said, yeah, she did. So it's fine. She did. She reached out and she touched it, and her daughter touched it. So that was kind of like a breakthrough for them. She was addressing the fear that she had. But look at the snake. That's a beautiful snake. It's not poisonous. It's not harmful, and it's actually beneficial. And then I asked her, I was like, well, do you want to hold the snake? And I knew, I was like, there's no way she's going to hold this snake. And then she said, yeah, she wanted to hold the snake. But then I kind of thought, I had second thoughts about it, because by this time the snake was kind of getting agitated, and I could feel it was constricting tighter around my arm. So then I told her, no, it probably wouldn't be a good idea right now. And I let the snake go because I didn't want her to have a setback, because she did have a breakthrough regarding that fear that she has. But there are where I am, there are so many animals, everything from bears and coyotes and bobcats and foxes. So there are wild animals, and some of them, they can be dangerous. But everything that's on our property, they should fear us. We shouldn't be fearful of them. And God has put a natural instinctive fear in the animals, and it's something we can't be. We have to be safe about it and not be um, cocky about it, but still we should not be fearful of the creatures that are around us. Now, the next point is finding your path to the country. And I mentioned that this is another mistake that people make, is just the way that they go about getting to the country. And there's a verse there from Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, with all thine heart, and lean not onto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. And that's what we need to do when we're thinking about moving to the country or in the process, we need to trust in God. We need to seek what He has for us and follow Him and petition Him to guide and direct us in everything, because there's so much that we don't know, we're not aware of, and even the plans that we make, we don't know what's going to happen or what's going on or what's around in that area, but God knows. He knows what's going to be there in the future, and we need to be conversing with God and asking Him to make our path sure. Another point is don't move in panic or fear because you're just stressed and you just feel like you're under the gun to make a move and to get to the country. So you don't want to be doing it and don't want to be rushing and in a panic, but you also don't want to procrastinate about it either. And this is something that I learned is to think more in terms of country living is something that can happen now. It's not because at first I used to, when I was thinking about moving to the country, I was like, well, one day I'm going to move to the country. And yeah, it's not going to be now, but it's going to be down the road. It's something that I'm planning to do in the future. But then it's like every time I got to the point, got beyond thinking in terms of this is something I'm going to do down the road and started thinking about, well, what can I do to make this happen now? That was when things would really start to move and work for me in my favor to enable me to move to the country. Just having that mindset of it not being, something that you're planning on doing down the road, but just something that you're thinking about, and God has a way that He can make it happen in His time, not what your time frame is. A lot of times people think about this in terms of retirement. When they're going to retire, that's when they're going to move to the country. But, why not retire now? Because you can do that. Country living is a way that you can, in a sense, you can retire from your current employment and do something different. Sometimes it's a stretch and it's something that people might not be comfortable with, but even if it means, retiring earlier than you wanted to, there's nothing wrong with that. And there are ways that you can make that happen. But I think it all begins with the mindset that you have and thinking along the lines of having the preparation, the things that we've already talked about, preparing for this and just having that desire and appreciation and the comfortability with things like living in the country with nature. And also, don't get hung up on thinking there's only one path to take. A lot of people will look at, okay, how somebody else wound up in the country and think that that's the only way, that they have to follow that same path that person took. And that's the wrong way to look at things, because God just has so many different ways, and all of us have a different path to take. And the way that one person got to the country, that's not going to be the way that you're going to get there. So you again ask God to show you, He has a way that's already laid out. He's already made it. And it's just you just need to follow that path. You also want to be open-minded about when you're going to go, where you're going to go, and how you're going to get there. Because a lot of people, they will set their mind on, when they're going to do it and where they want to go and what's the best way for them to do that. But when you do that, you're not going to be as receptive to opportunities that are out there for you. And a lot of people, they can block a blessing just by saying, okay, I'm not, it's no way I would move to such and such state or such and such area, and, they may not even really know anything about that area except what they've heard from other people talking about it. And even if it was an area that most people might not want to go to, that could be an area that God has made a way for you to get to go there and to, really do well in that area. And there may be work for you that God has for you, or specific people there that He has that you're going to help and that are going to help you. So don't just, write anything off or say there's some place that you wouldn't go. And the next point about, I kind of touched on this, God has ways and means that we don't know about. He has resources that we don't really anticipate that He has prepared and waiting for us. Then there's the case of making your way to the country with nothing, which is some people do. There's some people that just go and they could be living, get a piece of land and could even be a piece of land that they're renting and could throw up a tent and be living there, even in the winter in a tent or just a really unfinished house. And that's not the way that I would recommend it or advise, but some people have done that. And then there's the other option of going to the country with basically everything that you need and having everything that you need. And I've done it kind of both ways. The first time I moved to the country was shortly after college, and I went there. I really had nothing. I was in the DC area. I had a job. I had a really good job. But other than that, it's not like I had savings, I had a home or that I could sell. I had nothing like that. And when I moved from that area to the country, I pretty much sold everything that I had and left with nothing. I don't even think I had a car when I first moved to where I was in the country. So that's another way, and I've done it that way, and I thrived even doing it that way. But then I've done it with like when I moved here in West Virginia, I moved here where I did have resources. I was in Pennsylvania. I had a job, and then I was able to or had plans to keep a job or have a job when I moved to West Virginia, and that kind of fell through because of certain like the internet and the remote position that I had. So that kind of fell through, but I had plans to do that. I had some resources, I had some savings, and a lot of people will look at those two alternatives and they'll think, yeah, that person they have it easy. That's why they could move to the country because they had a house, they sold the house, they had some income, they had some savings. I don't have any of that, so I can't move to the country, but they can, and they kind of use that to justify it. But in a lot of ways, if you don't have nothing, if you have nothing, or if you have little, it's really some ways that's the easiest way to move to the country because it's like, well, what do you have to risk? You know, it versus if you have certain things like your position and your job and you have a house, you're risking that. And that's something that you work to develop and to have. And now you're still going to be sinking all of that into, something that you could go to the country and something could happen and it could not work out. So you're still you're risking a lot versus, really not having nothing and nothing to lose. So you can't just look at one person or one situation versus the other and think that, well, that's why one person can do this and I can't, because there are ways that you can get to the country with nothing. I've done that before. So there is definitely both ways, and there's some advantages and disadvantages to each. But regardless, you have to do it in order and to follow the way that God is directing you, whichever way you're doing it. And that scripture from Luke, it says, "For with God, nothing shall be impossible." And that is true. I mean, God can get you to the country with nothing. He can make a way, regardless of your situation, your status. God is in the one that's in control. And here this says, "Get a yard with a house instead of a house with a yard." And that's something that I think is important when you're moving and going to the country. A lot of people, they still have, it's more of a city mentality. They're looking at the house. That's where all their conditions are for the move is the house that they're moving into. That's where the focus is rather than on the property, the land. It's when I moved to West Virginia, it's like, even still to this day, the house that I'm in, that's not a focus at all. It never has been. And even as far as investing resources and things, I've done some things to improve the house, as far as like things that it didn't have, like a HVAC system and things like that I have done in terms of the house, just the infrastructure. But as far as the cosmetics of the house, I'll get around to some of that. And it's not like that the house is, bad cosmetically, but there are things that I could do, but it hasn't been a priority. My priority has been things like the gardening, the gardens, the outbuildings, having high tunnels and greenhouse and things like that, even, some of the other infrastructure. And to this day, now I'm getting to the point where a lot of that is where I would like it to be. So I'm ready to start focusing more on some of the things in the house. But the house and everything right now, for me, it was perfectly, comfortable when I moved in here versus, some other places, even the first time I moved to the country. And this is the case with a lot of people. The conditions, they might not be where you're used to as far as where you've lived in the city. It may be a step backwards for you, but sometimes that's the part of the price, part of the sacrifice that you make to get to the country. This was a place when I was moving from or looking for a place when I was lived in Pennsylvania, and I was looking for a place in the country. This was a place that was in Pennsylvania, not too far from where I lived. I looked at and was considering, I was thinking about purchasing this property. And it was a nice property, it was a smaller house, but that deal fell through, and I just kept looking, and that's something I'm going to talk about a little later. And this was a property that I looked at in Pennsylvania, not Pennsylvania, but West Virginia. And this, I was looking at this, I was considering this, and now looking back, I know that this would have been a disaster if I had bought this particular property. And this is the property where I am now in West Virginia. And I'll talk about this a little bit more too, about how sometimes God, He can turn your disappointments and help you realize it was a blessing that, certain things like that first deal fell through, there was a reason. Some of the obstacles that you're going to be managing in the country, one is going to be, that first one, debt and finances. Getting out of debt, reducing your debt, that is the first, to me, one of the first things that you should be doing, to the best of your ability if you want to move to the country, because having a debt load, that's just going to limit you. It's going to limit your opportunities. It's going to limit what you can do. And it will just be a lot easier for you, give you more flexibility if you move there and you don't have a lot of debt to start with. I mentioned the home repairs, about how it's hard to find people to do work in certain areas. The healthcare, the quality of the healthcare may not be as good as where you are in the city. Or to get healthcare, you might have to drive an hour to the nearest hospital, and even a couple of hours if you need to go to a hospital that has a certain level of or specialty care. And where I am blessed that there's a hospital that's like 7 miles from where I live, but it's just a small country hospital, and it's not, they have doctors and they have care. But if there was anything serious, they would be taking you right from there and helicoptering you to, another different hospital. Transportation, that's the big factor when you're in the country, you're in a rural area. You could be in somewhere where it takes you an hour to get anywhere, and you have to drive at those distances. So that is can be an obstacle. Crime and poverty, there is can be a lot of poverty in certain rural areas. Crime, it's different than in the city. Like where I am, there's not a whole lot of crime. It's not like I don't feel safe, but there are things like, if you leave your I have friends that have left their property and gone away. Sometimes it was for an extended time, but still, and they came back and someone had broken and really taken stuff that they had there. So that is something that you have to be considerate of. The isolation is something that a lot of people have trouble dealing with, the isolation even a solitude, which some people relish that, but others, they're used to being in the city and always being around, crowds of people. So that's something that is something that some people just have trouble adjusting to that. The learning curves, there's always going to be new things that you need to learn. The hassle of finding a property and the time it takes to locate a property, and especially if you're looking at properties that are a distance from where you are, where like for me, it was 5 hours from where I lived in Pennsylvania to here where I moved, and I was looking at properties in this area. So that, driving back and forth that distance just to look at a property, or you drive here thinking that a property you might be interested in and get there and realize, oh no, that wasn't anything like what the listing or the photos look like. So that kind of stresses you and becomes an obstacle. Your job opportunities are more limited in the some of the country rural areas. It's better now since the pandemic, there are more remote work opportunities, but it still is something that can be an issue. School systems, if you have children, the quality of the school systems. Internet access, that was a big one, and that one I mentioned earlier, that was what caused me to lose or the employment that I had planned for when I moved here. It's just like the internet access didn't meet their requirements. Now that's improved a lot because, with Starlink, most places, and that's more expensive, yes, but if you're running a business, if you need that for work, it's worth it, and it will be more than adequate. The retail, the stores, the shopping, again, you're going to be driving an hour just to go and get to a grocery store sometimes. And this is just, I mentioned about Starlink providing the internet for many areas now. Here you can see the isolation. If you have roads, this is my drive, and it's a private drive, and it's probably a few hundred, maybe 500 feet. But the roads, how they clear the roads, and this one I'm responsible for clearing this myself. But you're just somewhat isolated and limited, and certain things it's on you to manage and to take care of things. You're gonna be responsible for maintaining your equipment and even designing some of your setups. This is one of my high tunnels and a pump with a pressure tank on it. And it took me a while just to sort through where this was working up to the ways that I needed it to work, and I could take it in and out depending on the seasons. And now I finally got it to the way it needs to be, and it just works well. But it just took me a while to get there. As far as shopping, I mentioned the shopping, but the distance is required to go shopping, but for me, this is where I do a lot of my shopping. It's like right in my garden. So it's not a distance at all. And here, growing your own food is like printing your own money, and it is. It's so important. It's a skill that all of us should have, both now and for the future. We're going to look at the perspectives to country life. And some people think that once they get to the country, everything is going to be fine, everything is going to be great. But that's not the case. Being in the country doesn't make everything just easy overnight. And there are going to be a lot of trials and challenges that you're going to be faced with. And you should expect them and be, willing to deal with them, to manage, to work through them. Also, don't try to take on too much all at once. Some people, they just want to have everything set up, and they know there are things that they need to work on, and they want it to happen quickly. And I understand that, but even like for me, I've been here 6 years now, and there's still things that are on my list that I want to accomplish. But I don't try to spread well, I do spread myself too thin at times, but I do, if I take on too much, I know that I'm not going to accomplish anything. I'm not going to be, successful at any other things. So I'm a better judge now of what I can do. And also I'm better at, if I don't get to something, that's okay too. I just do what the priority things are, and some things can wait. Need to accept the loss of city conveniences. A lot of people will move to the country and they'll have that more of a city attitude. I've heard people talk about stories about how people that move here and they're coming to the county and they're talking to the county thinking that they're going to build them a bridge because a bridge to their house needs to be improved. And they think, oh, that's the responsibility of the municipality or the county. It's not going to work like that. And even with things like potholes in the roads, like right now, the road coming up to my property, there's a couple of spaces where it's rutted up. It needs to be worked on. And I know they'll get around to it eventually. But my perspective is, okay, just don't raise my property taxes, and I'll live with it until you get around to the potholes. That's more of my attitude. Also, when you're in the country, you're in a kind of a small bubble. Everybody out here knows everyone, knows each other. A lot of them, they grew up, they know the people, or they have relatives all over. So you're going to be an outsider in the community, and that's something that you're going to have to break through, get through that, and become part of the community. Some people also have that perspective or mentality that coming to the country is about being isolated or about hiding out, and it's not, and that's not going to benefit you, and it's not going to benefit others. You need to become a good neighbor and a friend to others around you. Yeah, there are people that aren't going to be your friend. There are people that don't want to have anything to do with you. But the majority, people here where I am, they've all been great. I have really good neighbors. Some neighbors that I don't know, but I have some neighbors that are good friends that have become neighbors, and I know them and interact with them. And also, but just recognize it. I put there that you're creating reputation. That might be not be the best way to put that, but what I was trying to get across is that when you move out here, because you're new, they know you're new. They're going to be watching you, even if you don't realize they're watching you. They're looking to see, what you do, how you treat people. There was some of the youth in the area that I've hired to come in and do, whether it's weed whacking, but odd jobs. And they look, and the word gets around to the community about how you treat people and what you're like. So they're going to know, even if you've never met them, they're going to know you and know things about you. Some of the things aren't going to be correct. I mean, I ran into somebody and they told me that, yeah, when you moved in here, that's what they said, that they thought I was Jamaican or something. I was like, oh, no, 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 nothing wrong with Jamaican, Sister Nicole, but they just, thought I was, for some reason, I don't know where they got that from, but it's just things like that. The word gets around. And we need to find ways to get involved in the community. This is something where I've been able to do one thing with things like going to the farmers market and becoming involved in some of the organizations in the area. So you want to tap into that network because that's something that's going to, really benefit you. It has benefited me and given me opportunities for things like even some of the grants that I've been able to get were as a result of just knowing some of the people at some of the organizations and working with them and knowing they know if there's something that they need, I'm willing to, whether it's writing a letter or helping with something that they're I've done some like Zoom presentations for some of the local ag groups, and even for the state, I've done some work. So they know that I will do things for them, and they're always also being able to support me in some of the things that I'm doing. In the country, you can reach people that you probably couldn't in the city. Here, you can know, the mayors, the sheriffs, the tax assessors. These people, you can really be. They'll know you. You can know them and interact with them. That's something that you don't get in the cities, and that benefits you in a lot of ways. And I could share a lot of stories related to those types of things and be ready when your plan, the best of your plans fail, always have a backup or something to fall back on. Disappointments can turn out to be your biggest blessings. I mentioned this, kind of barely just touched on this earlier about looking for houses, and the one property that I was looking at, how that, I came close to having a deal on that and it fell through, and I was disappointed about it. But over time, I came to realize, like with the property where I am now I know that it's so much better and more what I needed and what I was looking for than that first property was or ever would have been. So even though that was a blessing, God changed that. That was a disappointment. God changed that into a blessing that, I realize that now and I see that. And that's something that now it kind of helps you develop that mindset of knowing if something falls through, well, God has something better for me. I'm not going to dwell on that. I'm not going to worry about that. Here, I mentioned about the roads is just different as far as this is how sometimes you'll see where the roads are caving in, some of the mountain roads, and while in the time before they can get around to fixing it, they'll just put up a little stop sign and say, okay, you just alternate. You just cars take turns going back and forth if they come across each other here where that road is blocked off like that. And this is my neighbor. Her cows, every time they would get out, for some reason, they just loved it over here. They would always be over here. And I call her and I would tell her, hey, your cows are out again. And so she would come over and get them. And that was something I knew nothing about cattle. And, I'm like, well, what do you do when your cows? And it's not like, your dog is loose. You go and get them and put a leash on them. With the cows, you get a bucket of the grain and kind of like shake it around. They hear it and they'll kind of follow you back home. Everything you look at differently. Like here, the water, I don't have a well connected to my houses. I don't have a well for irrigation. And that's one of the things that people will tell you, oh, never buy a property if it doesn't have sufficient water, if it doesn't have a well, if it doesn't have this and that. But that was something, a reservation that I had when I bought this property, because I knew it was on a cistern. It was just caught rainwater everywhere. So the rainwater, rain itself, you just have a different perspective on that living in the country and when you're dependent on that. But now I'm to the point where I prefer that because I know that, God provides that water, the water that I use. And nobody can turn off my water except for God. And I don't have to pay for it. This was, I go to the farmer's market. This is some of the produce that I took, and this was from the fall. This was in November. So I was still growing tons of produce and selling it at the market. And things are different in West Virginia. This was like one of the farmers markets, and that's a market customer showed up on her horse. This is another way where you can get to know your neighbors. My nephew was here this past summer, and one day we just, boxed up some boxes of produce, and we went around visiting neighbors and dropping off produce. And that's something that will give you an open door, to come in and meet your neighbors and talk to them and just start developing that relationship with them. And even the church, we did supper clubs where we were having meetings and sharing with them different skills and um, just different topics ranging from things like health and nutrition and food preservation and gardening. So now just regarding misconceptions that people have about the country. One is that a lot of times I hear people saying, "Oh, it's not the right time for moving to the country." But I think that's just bad. And well, when is the right time going to be? It, during the pandemic, that was a time when a lot of people, it was a wake up call for a lot of people. They realized, oh, yeah, this is time I would be better off in the country than being here in the city. But then that's not the right time to be moving, and it wasn't the right time, even if you could. In some cases, people weren't able to move at that time. And then since then, you know, prices have gone up, the value of the property, the demand for country properties. So it's like if even if it's higher now, still it's going to get higher. So delaying and waiting is not necessarily going to make things easier or better in regards to moving. Some people think the more acres you have, the better off, the better it is. But that's not always the case either, because sometimes you can have hundreds of acres and it's not good acreage in the sense that it could be 100 acres, all going down the side of a mountain. So in just one spot that's big enough for a house, and that's what you have, versus someone else that could have 2 acres, but yet it's a nice flat area, and then they're surrounded by, some kind of game land or something, which is public land. Nobody else can build on it. So it's almost essentially like having thousands of acres, even though you actually only own 2 acres. So yeah, don't just kind of focus on or be impressed by the number of acres when you're looking at properties. I mentioned before about country property. It's not a hideout. Some people think it's a harsh, boring, or lonely existence. And this is, again, is like a mindset issue, but it's not. Be living in the country can be the most interesting, exciting place that you could be. Also, there's no perfect property out there. A lot of people, they get caught up in that, seeking a perfect property and never getting any property, because no matter what property you find, it's likely that there's going to be something that you're going to have to improve, or something that doesn't meet your requirements or what your expectations are. It's difficult to interact, reach, or minister to people. That's not true. I mean, now it's just so, we can reach people across the world, let alone across the country or across the state, just, using tools and the internet and options that we have available to us. Uh, and the last point there was that life is backwards or inconvenient in the country. And it's not. It's just, I don't, it's kind of, I understand why people think that sometimes, but to me, it's not definitely not backwards and even inconvenient. You don't have some of the conveniences, but still you're comfortable. And there's going to be a time when the simple things of the country are going to be just so much better than what's available and what's there in the city, even the most advanced city around. You're going to be better off somewhere peaceful and quiet and comfortable in the country. Now, as far as perspectives, some people will look at that and they'll be like, "Oh, those are cute little baby raccoons," but nope, those are might be cute now, but a few months from now, when they're a little bit bigger, they will raise havoc in your garden. So you have to control some of the wildlife that's around. And there's always things that you can get into and interested in, such as beekeeping, living in the country. Here, these are a couple of friends of mine, and they have a little mill set up so that they can cut timber and they can make their own boards to use for building materials. And this is another friend that they were putting in an outdoor shower, just, simple shower, again, this is something that I would love to have an outdoor shower. That's on my like wish list. That and also, an outhouse. That's on my wish list. And a lot of people will look at that and they'll think like an outhouse and they just think of outhouse and they think of poverty. But I think look at outhouse and I think of independence and not being having something that's going to work under no matter what your conditions are. So and it's a backup, both the outdoor shower and having an outhouse. Those are all things that are backups and, something that you can have that it's going to work, it's going to function no matter what. This is my niece, and she came and visit. My family has been coming and visiting often, like especially like last year. A lot of them came, and my niece, she came, and she just really enjoyed it here. And I have like two of my younger nieces. They came, and they came at different times. These were from um, different parents. But when they were here and they left, my little nieces, they cried because they didn't want to go. And then, I like felt bad, but it also made me feel good. Just the fact that, they got it, God got through to them and they saw, they understood what was here. They enjoyed it. They just loved it here. And so that's the thing. And then I can see the difference even between like the individual kids and their ages and where they are. Some are easier to get to than others. Others have just been so caught up into, the culture and the music and the whatever. They're into the games, the videos, and it's harder to get through to them. But getting them out in the country is just a matter of time. It might take longer, but you can reach them, and they can see the value, and they can come to love, being out just as much as my younger ones that didn't want to leave, didn't want to go back home. So now just a few closing thoughts. And one thing that I noticed and realized is when I was looking at properties, because of this property where I live on now, when I first saw it, I came here and I liked the property, but I just didn't pursue it at that point in time. And I kept looking at other properties and other places. And then eventually I circled back and it was still in the market. But at that point, the price was lower. There were things that they had included that weren't part of the original deal. And so it was better. It was better for me waiting and not having, pursued it the first time I saw this property. But the thing that kind of just brought to mind is that point there. If God has your name on something, nobody else can take it. They couldn't have sold this property if they wanted to, and they did. They had other contracts on this property and people that were interested, but that they all fell through. And I kind of look back and I think it was because, the God had reserved this property for me. So it wasn't anything that they could do to sell it. And if they had sold it, then it still would have been back on the market because God intended for me to be here. And God has a plan and a purpose for all of us. He has a place, He has something in mind for you, no matter where you are. And it's just going to be different in terms of how you attain it and how you get there. In the second paragraph there, I mentioned don't worry over the things that you can't control, because that's something else that a lot of people do. They'll, almost make excuses about why, you shouldn't move to the country or why, certain places in the country aren't going to be a good idea. But, if certain things that you can't control, God can control. And one of the things I hear people talk about sometimes is that, oh, well, if you move to the country, we can't buy or sell in a time of trouble with this and that, you're not going to be able to pay your taxes, so you're going to lose your property. And my thing is like, well, at some point you're going to lose your property regardless, whatever, you're going to lose your property. But, things like taxes, God has a plan for that. You might think you're going to lose that property, but that's something that you have no control over. You can't control that, but God has a way, and He's already figured out what He's going to do when that happens. And some of these things, if we're doing what we need to be doing, God will show us. He'll make it clear. Because I've seen examples of this, of how I know that God. I've seen God, work in that specific way, just in terms of taxes and how He can make a way to eliminate that as being an issue or a problem for us. Also, don't make an idol out of a country property or living in the country, because everything in this world is going to pass away. And there's just so much more that God has promised to us, for us, and it isn't He has in store for us. And this scripture is from Hebrews chapter 11. And I want to invite you to just read that whole chapter and read it in light of country living and the things that we've been talking about today during this presentation. But just read that chapter of Hebrews because there's just so many, points and messages in there that relate to, faith and country and can kind of tie in with country living. And it's a couple of points here. It talks about how, you know, it goes through the long list of believers and what they suffered through, the trials and tribulations that they had, and yet they maintained their faith. And they recognize that we're strangers and pilgrims on this earth. But they sought a country, just like, you know, we seek a country living or country property. They were seeking a country, but it's a heavenly country, and that's the same for us. We're in search of a heavenly country. And that last verse, the last sentence there, it says that God hath prepared them for them a city, and God has prepared so much for us, and we will attain. We just have to maintain that faith. And this is another just a picture from the one of the front fields on my property. And then I guess we have time for some Q&A, but I also want to share with you that in my property, I do workshops. I also have some hands-on online courses, not hands-on online, but online courses. You can get more information about all of those at my website, coregardening.com. And I also do where you can come and you can stay. You can spend time here. If you can do a farm stay, or you can have a private workshop, or you can just come here for some rest and relaxation, or just a getaway and have quiet time and get some experience. This is one of the things that is part of that preparation that I talked about earlier, and getting in tune with nature. And this is a space where you can come and can get a feel, because there's some things that you're not, if you don't have experience, you don't know, you're not even going to realize that these are things that you're going to need until you actually get out and get some experience in regards to that. And right now that I do have the other houses set up on Airbnb right now, but at some point I'm probably going to transition this and just have this not even on Airbnb, but just totally available just for people that are looking for farm stays. And that's my contact information, my phone number, email address. And you can feel free to get in touch with me if you have questions or need anything that I can assist you with. And I'll hand it back over to Sister Nicole.
Thank you so much, Brother Kenny.
Oh,
I'm
you're welcome.
blessed. And before I take the questions, what stood out to me is the fact that you said we're not to watch anybody journey. We are to allow the Lord to lead us to where He wants us to be, where He has decided and purpose in His mind from eternity for us to be. And just like you, where I live, a lot of persons that I don't have water, it's rainwater I have to depend on. And so I've learned so many lessons from not having the government or somebody providing rainwater for me. My eyes opened for me to see, oh, when I was in the city, I waste a lot of water because now that I have limited water, I have to use it wisely. So there are so many things. And I don't have the deers and the raccoons, but I have a lot of lizards. And I have a lot of blackbirds that sing and eating the apples that are in the tree at this time. But for me, as you said, I am not on my country property as yet, where I am with my husband. We rent somewhere. And so, as you said, sometimes you have to step back in order to move forward. So, I'm learning so much where I am right now. I'm in a humble home and I'm learning so much about myself. So it's not even about the the house, is about what I have to learn. As you talk about isolation, it touched me because when I came back, when we moved here in November last, I was like, the silence was getting to me because where I was before, we were sharing it with someone. And when I'm in the city, I'm used to my family around me, my mother, my father, and my siblings. And most times I'm home alone in the days. And I was like, this was so silent. And I used to be calling persons. And then one day the Lord said to me, you need to talk to me. And so I'm learning now to enjoy this time of silence because God given me this time of being alone for a purpose. So everything that you say is just such a blessing. And I hope persons are blessed. And I hope when we send out the recording, persons will share it with others because you talked about the common mistakes, but you did it in a way that is so positive that persons will see the benefit of doing what they are to do. I see you show the sign of the road signs in what happened in your country here. Well, in Jamaica, we are familiar with that. Whether we're in the city or in the country, they just don't fix the road until when they have the time. So we want to thank you so much. Now the floor is open for questions. If anyone have any questions or comments, you can just unmute and ask your questions or raise your hand if you so desire. Any questions? Any comments? I guess everybody, it was straightforward and everybody was blessed by the program. Um, Somebody said, thanks for the informative webinar. How did you find out about acquiring your property? That is from someone. Put that in the chat.
Okay. This particular property, I found out from, there's a local farmer in the area, and I had came across him on Audioverse because he had information. We had put recordings out there, and he talked about, he also does educational programs at his farm. So I had contacted him. I reached out to find out more information about his classes that he offered because I wanted to attend one of his classes. And then at the end of our conversation, because he had mentioned that before he moved to West Virginia, he had looked all over the country for different places, different properties. So I just asked him, told him I was looking around and asked him, what made him, how he felt about West Virginia and what made him move there out of all the places. And he said, well, he just said West Virginia is a hidden gem, and that was how he put it. And he told me that he had looked at around, and he just settled in on West Virginia. And then he told me that he knew a couple of realtors in the area. If I wanted to look around here, he would connect me, and I did. I followed up with one of his friends, and this was the property that I live on now was one of the properties that they had listed at the time. So I came out and I checked it out. I just didn't pursue it at the time. As I mentioned, there was another year after that before, you know, I came circle back and it was still on the market and they had lowered the price. They had included equipment that wasn't part of the deal originally. So at that point, I did pursue it and everything just worked out perfectly from that point on in terms of acquiring the property. But but it took me, I looked at so many properties. I took so many trips to West Virginia, to place parts of Pennsylvania. So it was, some people think, it's going to be easy, but it might be, but it could take some time. But in the end, for me, it was worth all the effort in the time that I spent to, eventually find a place.
Thank you. If you don't have your contact information as yet, you can just send a direct message to either myself or Tamika Simpson. Any other questions or comments? So there seem to be no questions or comments. Well,
So
go ahead, Sister Charlene.
I didn't want to ask, and then it was already discussed. So when you come late,
It's okay, Sister Charlene. Go ahead. Reinforcement is good.
no problem. I too just looking more favorably at the country living portion of it. But I'm trying to find out, Brother Kenny, where you are. Is it that you are alone out there? Is it that there's a community of you out there? Because I'm thinking, Sister Nicole, that if we're going out, then we don't want to go out one family, you want a community of you can support each other, persons around. I'm wondering what that experience, if he's alone, what that experience would have been like for him.
Well, for me, I wasn't actually completely alone because when I moved here, I also, there's a church that I attend, and the church was about probably 45 minutes from where I live. But just there, I was able to find others that, were like-minded and just had a lot of the same interest, and even a lot of them that had moved to this area from other places. So that was one place that I did have, it wasn't like I knew them before I moved here, but I quickly became acquainted with them, became friends with them. So that definitely helped. And even in terms of the community, getting involved there, that's another place, between the farmers market and, some of the other organizations, and just starting to meet people and just share things or find getting information. That's part of the process because just through some of these connections is how I find out about a lot of things, even things like finding someone that can do some work around your place as far as plumbing and things. A lot of that is just by word of mouth. You might some of the connections that you've made, ask them because they're in the area, so they're more familiar with what's here and what's available, than you are. Even if you try to do a search on the internet, you're not going to come up with anything that way. So it is important to network, to become familiar with people in the area. And here it's quick to be able to make those connections, even just going into the store. It's not like you're somewhere in the city and you go to a Home Depot and you're talking to somebody there. Here you go to a little hardware store and it's going to be every time you go there, it's going to be the same guys and you're going to be talking to them. You're going to get to know them and you know that they know you by name when you walk in there. You're just not like a customer or a face that's there buying something. They know who you are. And so it's just little things like that. So you're not just totally isolated unless that's what you want and that's what you stay, keep your distance. And as I mentioned that earlier also about how some people, that's kind of like the attitude that they have, but I think that's not a positive attitude to have. Does that answer your question?
Oh yes, oh yes. But I was just wondering, following up, because for persons who are moving with children or with elderly, I wondered, is it that within the community? So it seems as though you are not very rural, you're out of the city, but you're
Mhm.
not very rural. So
Oh,
this, you're, go ahead.
actually, I am very rural where
Oh, yeah.
it
Mhm.
is, but there's still, there are people, even though I'm rural, there's people in the area. And it is, if you're moving with family, that's a benefit, I mean, it's just me. I live alone. I'm not here with a family. So
Yeah.
that's more of a challenge than if you at least have your immediate family with you, you know. So I'm even more isolated in that sense than you would be.
Yes, 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 yes. Yes, because now I was just thinking, if we're moving with family and alone, at some point, just thinking about healthcare, thinking about schooling, just doing those things as a community,
Yes.
also. But then I was also wondering again, because I was late, um, weather conditions where you are. Because I went recently up into the mountainous region in Jamaica, thinking that might be an option for me, but just the road to get there and the precipice on either sides and just no road. I know that that is not an option right now for
Right.
me. I consider all the land slippage and I'm just trying to be as realistic as possible. So, what's the weather condition like where you are? And do you have internet service? I know the water and those things are standard things that you'd think about, but
Mhm.
how do you navigate just those
Yeah.
challenges?
Yeah, and all those are important things. They are things that you have to consider, you have to take a look at, especially like you mentioned the roads. And where I am, I'm also blessed in that I have easy access to my property. A lot of I have friends and even other people that I know where I go to their property, and I'm like, man, if I had to do this, it's no way you could do it without having like a four-wheel drive
Yes,
SUV.
yes.
But my where I am, that's not the case. So I'm fortunate in that sense. But a lot of places that's not the case. But that's the thing that you have to research and you have to look and see and consider when you're looking at a property. You want to make sure if it's going to be something that you can manage. And then the other thing is even during the winter, like here we do have winter, we get snow, and and the weather's not too bad. Like this winter, past winter was the most snow that we've had since I've been here. Prior to last year, typically if we might get some snow one day and then the next day it'll warm up and the snow will melt. And I never even had to shovel or get out a snow blower. It would always just melt the next day. But last winter and then this winter in particular, we had one stretch where over a week's time we might have had 24 inches of snow and it stayed cold. So it didn't melt, but that's unusual for this area. And I was used to snow because I lived in Pennsylvania. Where I was in Pennsylvania, we got a lot more snow and it would be snow that would last for weeks versus compared to where I am now. So here, it was a change for that made it much better just in terms of the winter conditions are a lot better here than they what I was accustomed to where I lived in Pennsylvania.
Wow. Wow. That's interesting. Very interesting. Um, Finally for me, I don't know why I generate so much waste.
Mm,
I just seem to generate a whole lot of
mhm.
waste. So where you are, is it that you do have some services
Uh,
still, waste disposal
yeah,
services, or you have to get rid of, burning? I don't know what the law allows where you are.
yeah, and that's going to vary because where I am, we have Waste Management, which is a popular waste company in across at least the eastern part of the country. I'm not sure about other parts, but they're well known, and I had them in Pennsylvania, so they provide service where I am here, and they come once a week and pick up the trash, and we have bins where you just put your trash in out at toward the end of my drive near where the mailboxes are, and there's a bin that's kind of enclosed so that wildlife can't get to the trash before waste management comes to pick it up. But that's fine. And we have typical services. I mean, we get our mail is dropped off right there. And I'm also fortunate as far as utilities. I don't really have much in the way because I'm on a septic system, so I don't have to pay for septic service, catching rainwater, so I don't have to pay for water.
Yeah.
I do have solar, so that assists with electricity. And because my property, we have natural gas in the ground, so I
Mhm.
don't have mineral rights to any of that. But because there's natural gas there, I get free usage of that. So I can use that for heating, for cooking, for hot water, and don't have, and it's free. So that's a really nice perk. And that's something that you'll find I shouldn't say a lot, but many rural properties, at least in this area where I am, that's a feature that you can get. And that's typically as part of the deed. So it transfers to you if you buy a property where that's in service there.
Right.
So I'm real, just the cost of living is just so much better here. That's another thing I didn't even talk about during the presentation, but the cost of living is just so much lower here than where it was in the city where I live. And even the property taxes, what I pay for property tax, I pay less for a year than I paid for a single month where I was in Pennsylvania. And I just feel like that's the way it should be. Property taxes shouldn't, be like having a mortgage. They should be more reasonable, but they aren't. But you can find areas, especially rural areas, where property taxes are inexpensive.
Thank you
Thank you.
so much.
Thank you, Sister Charlene, for asking those questions. I hope those help you. And I know you are praying, so the Lord will direct you to that special place He has prepared for you and your family. Sister Veronica, you can go ahead and ask your question or comment.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you so much for offering this program and having Brother Kennedy back. He is always just so informative and has very organized presentations. So don't be concerned if there are no questions because he presents very clearly. But I don't know if I've ever asked this question before, but I figure I better take a moment. And that is, what are your thoughts, Brother Kenny, on the strategic relocation book? Since you might be familiar with it and you might have looked at it when you were looking at property or just looked at it in general. What are your thoughts about that
I'm
book?
not familiar, just I haven't really read it through. I've seen parts of it. I might have even skimmed through a little bit. And I feel like it's good, as a resource, but it's not something I would just put, you know, full faith into. And again, there could be an area in that book that, that the author advises against, but that could be the place that God wants you to be. So, that's what's the most important. And and the person that wrote it, or I don't know if it was a group of people that wrote it, I'm sure one person wouldn't have been familiar with everything throughout the country and be an authority on all the areas. So, you still have to, you can use it as a resource, but I just wouldn't completely rely on that. I would still use other things to make a decision or to even look into, decide on where I was going to consider moving to. And maybe there could be something in there for a specific issue, which would make me shy away from a particular area, but it would just vary. Like I said, I would use it as a resource, but not as a sole resource or an authority. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm driving,
Okay.
and my mom and I just came from an event, so I had to have you on Bluetooth, and it was just ending right when you were starting. So I was so grateful for that.
Okay. Great.
But yes, that's clear. I was just curious because you know, originally, well, not originally, but when I first started thinking about the country, I remember being introduced to that book. And I just wanted a more seasoned country living person to give their viewpoint on it because it kind of gives I think I have the third edition and there's one after that. It doesn't give any state 5 stars. I think it gives one state 5 stars, if I'm not mistaken, but most get 4 or 3. And there's so many um, things that it ranks it on. It almost makes you feel as if, oh, well, where in the world are you going to find a place that meets this criteria?
Right.
I definitely wholeheartedly agree that you have to be led by God. And I think I might have shared that with you before. It's important to be led by God because it's going to be hard. And I know I personally need that confirmation from God to give me the drive to push and the tenacity to push through the perseverance, to push through those hard times, knowing, nope, God told me I'm here, stay my butt here, do whatever I got to do to make it here works.
Right.
And so, yeah, yeah, that's it. And then I appreciate what the sister said, not going alone. And that is important to not be all by yourself, but it's different when you're a gentleman than when you're a single female being alone.
Yeah.
Especially if there's some women that could really give you a run for your money when it comes to being handy. And unless you're a very handy person in the trades that men, quote unquote, tend to dominate, it can be very difficult by yourself. But again, I'm going to say, if God told you to go there, God's going to send you the people to get you what you need when you need it. I know personally, my car is on the brink, and I heard you say 4x4, and I was going to ask you that question because I was like, it's nice to have a paid for car, but my car isn't for the traditional country area. So now my brain has to process taking a little bit of country living money I had to buy a car. And, that's kind of what I'm a little concerned about right now. But anyway, I just was curious about the, what your opinion about that book. But if you're not familiar with it, then that's fair enough.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. And also, I think a big important thing is no matter where you are right now, you can still be preparing, developing those skills. And, we don't know how much time we have left. We don't know what's coming down the road, what's going to happen in the future, but just preparing, learning skills, that's going to help you because it may even come down to where, people are going to be going to the country and going to other people's properties at some certain point. And then you want to be able to contribute.
Yeah.
So that's why if you're just developing some skills, you're going to be an asset even in a situation like that.
Right.
So it's just important to be preparing and, trusting in God.
That's so true. I agree. And that's why I'm on Zooms a lot to learn because I feel like there's going to come a time when I can't get this information and I'm just going to know whatever I wrote down or whatever I downloaded or whatever is in the book I got or supplies or whatever. And in this day and age, it's, it seems like I remember during the pandemic feeling burdensome and stressed, like, oh, I need to go yesterday. But now I feel it even more. And I feel like I'm not even any closer. It's like I know more, but I don't feel like I'm more closer to the country. So I just want to encourage maybe Sister Nicole and the Neighbor to Neighbor ministry, maybe to have an opportunity to, have a prayer time so that we could join in prayer for persons not to be worried, but to continue to trust God and guiding them to the country. I mean, I remember, I don't know where exactly, but I know someone will remember that, Spirit of Prophecy says that some will get out like Lot.
Mm-hmm.
The sad thing about that is that Lot's wife didn't make it, Jesus.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you got out, but at what cost?
Mm-hmm.
At what cost? So, that's just where I am. And I feel like it's even more so close. It's so much more close. And this, please keep us in prayer, all of you folks already in the country and, providing opportunities like this to learn from you. Just keep us in prayer. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome, Sister Veronica, and safe journey, and we will keep you in prayer. Go ahead, Brother Sean.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Yeah, I just want to ask, I just want to know how safe it is for a container to be living in.
How safe? What was that the question? How safe what?
The container to live in. Like a 40-foot container?
Um, okay, I'm not sure what type of container are you asking about? I
Like
didn't.
you know those container that they use for
Oh,
house, like
you
you could
mean
use for
to
your
use that
farm.
for your
Yes.
shelter?
Yes, I just want to know how safe it is to live in it.
I think it's safe. I mean, I know people have been using those. I'm sure there's some issues, like I don't know, just in terms of temperature control. What area are you talking about? In a tropic setting? Are you talking about somewhere where you would be there during the winter? I think that would be a couple of my concerns. Is just the like temperature control, the insulation. But I know people that have used the containers and have turned those into houses and have lived in them. I had a friend in St. Croix that's what they were living in, a container, and it was nice. It was nice,
Okay.
but I have no, experience living in one. So, but I would, if I was considering that, I would just do some research and find out the pros and cons related to that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Brother Sean, for asking that question. And I see a lot of persons using the containers, and I've seen like persons use it for tiny houses that they use the container, and they are in parts that has snow and those stuff.
Mm.
But one of the things that before I moved to the country, and a friend of mine had shared with me, sometimes we're looking for country living, but we're limiting the country living to the country that we're living in. Sometime the Lord is probably going to take you to another island, another place, another different country, to do country living. Because I have a friend, they left Jamaica and they are in Belize doing country living. So what I've come to recognize is that we read the book Country Living, and I guess that book that Sister Veronica wrote mentioned, we read that book. But as she said, and I'm just reiterating, is that we seek God and ask God what he wants us to do. Those are the guidelines that he would have given Sister White in Country Living, because I did that research. And I know one of the persons, when I told persons where I was, they said, but you don't have any water. But then everybody's journey is different, and God have a purpose for where he's placing you at the time he's placing you. So we just have to be obedient and allow God to do the work that he's going to do in our life. For me, my life has been transformed so much that I'm not looking to have a home that if I can't make it from concrete, then I'll make it from what is available, because it's really about being obedient to God, and you'll see the miraculous work that the Lord do to you when you're living in the country and allowing the Lord to teach you spiritual lessons. And so I'm just encouraging persons, if you are not in the country yet, don't give up, don't lose hope. Just be obedient, that you have that mind that is fixed. If the Lord tell you to move today, you move. And all the stuff that Brother Kenny mentioned in preparing for country living, you prepare for it. For me, I got some stuff that I don't even start using them yet, but I have them. And so that's what I did. And as I said, some persons may not think of renting. Well, I relocate to the country because of marriage. That's how my transition got so quick. But sometimes you probably can think of probably renting somewhere, and until you get that permanent home that the Lord have in store for you. And just as it said, go and visit, go on camps, do things that will open your mind to what God wants you to do. And so that's just my little testimony. I want to thank you, Brother Kenny, for coming on. As always, the Lord just use you to let your presentation is so simple, to the point, and it encourages us to want to do gardening and want to share what we have learned with others. And so for those who want the recording, again, I'm going to ask you to send a message either to Sister Tamika or myself. And so, Brother Kenny, before Sister Kim pray for us for closing prayer, is there any last comment you want to say to us?
Just that, again, the preparation just to start doing things and to start thinking about it. If you have an interest, if you do want to move to the country, start thinking, focusing on that, and taking the simple steps that you can do now, no matter where you are, to prepare for that, and to just start investing in just like you were just saying, investing in things that you're going to need, that once you get there. Sometimes it's easier to get them now, and there's certain things that are available now that even during the pandemic, all of a sudden it was hard to get them. You couldn't get them. So those are the types of things that you want to have on hand, and regardless of where you are, but you can get them while they're available rather than putting it off and then getting to a point where you need them and they're not available. So that's just something else that's just important. And I guess also just to know that God has a plan for us. He knows, where he wants to use us. He knows the skills that we have, the talents that he's given to us, and being ready and prepared to use them. And you can start, just working on those types of skills as well as your country living skills. Just do the work that God has set there for you, and that that he wants you to be focused on, and also reaching out to other people that are around you and sharing the knowledge and the information that you have, that you've learned, and to continue just to research and gather the information. And Veronica mentioned, the fact that there's some point we won't be able to do Zooms. We might not have access, or they're going to be restricted. They're going to be censored. So, do what you can do now, learn the skills, and also get books. Books are something that can't be censored if you have them. They can't be restricted. They can't be turned off. So those are things that we should have, books with the skills and the information that we can fall back and resort to when we need to.
Thank you again, Brother Kenny. And before you pray, Sister Kim, Lord, just remind me, as Brother Kenny was talking about learn skills, one of the most important things that we are commissioned to do is to study natural remedies. So you live in the country, you need to have natural remedies and know your herbs that you can help yourself, because the hospital may be far away. Each place, hospital does play a role, but if you're a hour away from the hospital, know things that you can use in before to save your life, because it may cost your life if you don't know natural home remedies. Okay, Sister Kim, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let us pray. O kind and compassionate Father and our God, we give you thanks again for what you have done for us, to lift up your name high and holy in different regards of our lives. Indeed, Lord, this is one of your way in which many of us would actually be able to develop our characters through country living. So I pray, dear Father, that each and every one of us and those that are going to listen thereafter will be blessed, and indeed, Lord, that you may provide accordingly. You are our provider and our sustainer and our deliverer, and we trust you, and we know that indeed you will continue to do marvelous things for your children. Lord, you see the prayer request is known and unknown. Lord, I pray, dear God, that you may do marvelous things in each and every one of us lives. You know that each and every one of us, Lord, have our steps towards country living. Some are already there, some are on their way, some are thinking about it. Whatever it is, dear Father, we ask that you continue to encourage their hearts, continue to be with them, continue to help us to continue to focus upon you, because Lord, you are our finisher. You are our sustainer. You are indeed our God. And so we here this day just to gather this information, not just take it as a breeze, but dear Father, that we may put it in practice, and that indeed, Lord, that we may write down what we can, so that we can be able to have it as reference in the future. Continue to bless and keep each and every one of us, and especially our presenter. Lord, thank you so much for this information that you have given unto us, Lord. I ask, oh God, that we may do well for us. thank you so much again for this platform. Continue to be with the organizer, the leaders. Lord, continue to bless them abundantly. Bless us and keep us even though we pray in Jesus' precious and holy name with thanksgiving. Amen.
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 Amen. Thank you again, Brother Kenny, and
Welcome.
I'll be in touch with you. And thank you everyone for stopping by.